Thanks everybody for hanging in. Still seems to be a lot of energy in the room, thanks to the two prior speakers. I think when Bill McKibben was introduced last night, it was pointed out that he was the first author of a popular book about global warming. And I'd like to say that I think preceding him by about 6 months, in early 1989, I was the first author of an op-ed article calling for a carbon tax. It was in the Washington Post. I should have sort of put it up on the screen, but didn't think ahead to do it. But I've left a few copies out there if anybody wants to look at the historical record. You know, part of me wishes that in 1989 or 1990 I had had the oomph to form the Carbon Tax Center rather than waiting until 4 years ago. Maybe history would have been completely different, huh? Probably not. But the fact is that for more than a dozen years, at least as far back as the negotiations that led to the Kyoto Accords in 1997, the mainstream environmental groups invested their moral authority and political muscle in a cap-and-trade approach. Now, this was popular inside the Beltway, but it was a total loser in the larger battle to excite and mobilize public opinion. And I'm one of the people who feels that the way to win battles in a legislature is not simply to neutralize or buy off your opponents, but to mobilize the supporters, to identify the beneficiaries, to rally them and bring them together and have them outshout those who feel that their ox is going to be gored by the legislation. The passage of the cap-and-trade bill by the House 18 months ago was a sign not of success, but of failure, given the razor-thin margin for what was then a very popular cause, stopping climate change. The 7-vote win was also a harbinger because, as we know, a similar cap-and-trade bill never made it to the Senate floor. Of course, attacks by the denialists took a toll, but the arcane and convoluted nature of cap-and-trade made it hard to love and made it hard to rally that crucial support. Its links to the financial industry as well, once viewed as an asset, turned toxic after the housing bubble burst in 2007 and 8. Now, there is a better way to put a price on carbon, one that would also deliver a dollar-and-cents bonus to a majority of Americans, and that is a carbon tax, especially the revenue-neutral form of carbon tax called a fee and dividend system, to use Jim Hanson's excellent framing of it. And I want to say that when we talk about revenue neutral, we mean 100% revenue neutral. And I know it's going to sound doctrinaire and rigid, but we don't mean 99% of revenue returned with 1% going to something else, or 90-10, or 75-25. Now, the fact is that at the end of the legislative process, it's going to end up being something like that. But you don't go into the legislative battle already compromising and giving up, not the purity, that's not appropriate, but the clarity and the moral high ground of what it is that you're proposing. I get a lot of emails and occasional phone calls from denialists out there, and I try to be relational and respond to them, and I'm often able to get them on my wavelength, and the way that I do that is by talking and emphasizing the revenue neutral quality that the federal government, I don't hate the federal government, but a lot of people out there do, and I say that the government isn't going to get to keep 1 cent of this, it's all going back to the people. Now, fee and dividend, like cap and trade, would limit emissions by building a fee for carbon pollution into the price of gasoline, coal-fired electricity, and other fossil fuels, giving consumers and businesses powerful incentives to use less. As in cap and trade, the fee would be imposed at the wellhead or import dock and passed down to consumers through the supply chain. But there are 2 critical differences between the cap system and the fee or tax system. Actually, sort of 1 between my system and Peter's, and 2 between mine, the revenue-neutral carbon tax, and the cap-and-trade. 1 is that the revenue-neutral carbon tax would turn the proceeds of these higher energy costs over to the American public to spend as they wish, rather than to corporate emitters to fatten their bottom lines, or to Washington lawmakers to lavish on pet projects. Under fee and dividend, each American household gets a monthly check or electronic deposit, For a majority of families, this green check, as Jim again calls it, would offset the higher energy prices caused by the fee. But the other difference is even more basic. Under a cap, whether it's Dan's or Peter's, the price on carbon would be set in a vast trading market. You can't have a cap without trading, because if we had a cap without trading those permits, it would lock the economy into a frozen system of allocations where no new entries into businesses would be able to have permits. You've got to have the trading and the liquidity in order to have a cap system. And the price on carbon would be buffeted by fluctuating factors like the economic growth rate and hedge bets by speculators. You know, I've got some of this on the, so let's sort of see this. All right, we've already talked about this, and now we're kind of here. But with the fee or the tax, the price is not cloudy, the price is set up front, and its rising trajectory is known in advance. This is pivotal. Consumers and entrepreneurs need to be able to bank on the future value of saving energy. They need to know that price up front. The price incentive to move away from carbon-emitting fossil fuels has to penetrate every nook and cranny of the economy, ensuring that few opportunities to reduce climate-changing emissions are left on the table. Now, here's where I'm going to take a little bit of issue with some of Dan's perspective. Well, I certainly agree that price and carbon isn't the only thing we need to do. There are these institutional barriers that Dan spoke of very eloquently that need to be cleared away. Well, where's the will? Where's the interest? Where's the political muscle? Where's the societal focus to come from, if not from the returns that are going to be able to be earned under a system that has a rising price for carbon? We haven't, it's true, been able to clear away things like split incentives between renters and owners. But once the returns become just too attractive to ignore, or the burden of that carbon tax becomes too onerous to ignore, then there will be a tailwind behind the efforts of great groups like NRDC that have been laboring for 30 years, sometimes successfully, but not always, to clear away those institutional barriers. Now, it's nice to think that the cost of implementing energy efficiency in buildings, say, is negative because it's not a free lunch, it's a lunch you paid to eat, as somebody once said. Well, then why aren't we doing all that? It's because it takes focus. And there's only so much focus, there's only so much mind share out there. Business owners, households, institutions, government, all have a myriad of things to worry about. And what's going to put energy-saving opportunities and the transition to clean energy on their radar screen is going to be the returns that they can earn, because the price incentive is making it super profitable, too profitable to ignore, to save energy or to transit out of fossil energy to clean energy. I'll go further and say we don't really know what that energy budget is. I mean, 350, it would be terrific, but maybe that's not the number we need. Maybe it's 370, maybe it's 330, maybe it's 300. All that we know is that we've got to get off of carbon as quickly as we can. That's the imperative. There's no magic number, it's a magic direction, and that direction is down. And to get down off of carbon as fast as possible and ubiquitously as possible, that price incentive has to be clear, transparent, and rising. Want more convincing of the magic of a carbon tax over the sleight of hand of cap and trade? Well, it's this kind of perverse incentive phenomenon. Another thing that Jim has pointed out that kind of troubled me a long time ago. You know, I've been a big advocate of things like wind power in Nantucket Sound. You know, screw the Kennedy family. Let's put those windmills, let's put it in, right where people are using the energy. We need to get off of the dirty energy as quickly as possible. But under a cap and trade system, the building of a windmill, the changing out of light bulbs, the transition from a low MPG car to a high MPG car, or from cars, period, to bicycles, all of these steps are going to be undermined and in fact offset under the cap. Because under a cap, getting that wind farm permitted and built and operating ends up reducing the demand for carbon emission permits, because less fossil fuel has to be burned to make the electricity. There is less demand for those permits, so the price of the permits falls. That diminishes the financial return for other actions elsewhere that would also reduce emissions and get us off the fossil fuels and get us down that carbon chain. But on the other hand, with a carbon tax or fee, since individual actions have no effect on the legislated carbon price, every action to reduce emissions is rewarded with no offsetting built-in disincentive. Now, did no one in the mainstream environmental groups think of this? Or was the fear of a political backlash against that four-letter TAX word so strong that it was decided to put a price on carbon, but in secret? We can't do this in secret. The rising trajectory of fossil fuel prices has to be visible to all, from the aircraft manufacturer considering using costly, exotic materials in a new generation of efficient aircraft to raise fuel efficiency, to local officials wrestling with whether a new school should be built in town near the bus stop and the bike lane or on the car-dependent outskirts. Millions, billions of similar carbon-critical decisions, from the individual level of taking transit to the societal level of ensuring that these options are available, attractive, and valorized, that they are valued in the culture, have to be taken with full knowledge of the prices. A stealth price that's lost in the noise of fluctuating prices and general inflation isn't going to do the job. Now that the 13 years after Kyoto have yielded nothing, it's time to go back and pick up the alternative that has been there all along. Now, a climate bill based on a revenue-neutral and rising carbon fee would not require a cap-and-trade market in carbon derivatives. By being transparent, it would be less vulnerable to the beltway carve-outs that turn cap-and-trade bills into political punching bags and laughingstocks. It could be imitated internationally because carbon fees are fungible between countries, whereas caps are not, and it wouldn't require a PhD in complexity to grasp. Now, one such bill you heard about last night, it's John Larson's America's Energy Security Trust Fund Act of 2009. We were all pleased to hear that he's going to reintroduce it. Well, here's a comparison of complexity. More important, here's efficacy. And this is the percent reduction based on my modeling, but I think it's reasonable. And finally, on lead time, the British Columbia carbon tax took 6 months, 5 months to implement. RGGI, which is the cap-and-trade system that covers electricity in the Northeast states, which pretty much crashed in the last year as the economy tanked, has taken 5 years. A climate bill like the Larson bill would also honor a fundamental tenet of environmentalism, that the costs of pollution must be internalized into the price of the activities that cause it and paid by those who benefit from it. So it's our conviction at the Carbon Tax Center that a carbon tax or fee and dividend is simple enough, transparent enough, and profitable enough for everyone but the gross emitters to be a political winner. A critical first step is for the mainstream environmental groups to put their moral authority and political weight behind it. Now, educating the American people and cutting through the fog of fossil fuel money and the slime of talk radio is going to take time. Winning political support is going to demand patience and commitment, maybe not this week or next month, but the public, I'm convinced, is ready to be mobilized. Well, here's a little homespun scorecard I put together. It's my last slide about the struggle for justice in America. We've made some strides, and I'm sure many of you may disagree with this rating system, but nothing is all a winner. I think we've made some pretty good strides on some fronts, but we really haven't even gotten to first base on the climate struggle, the climate justice struggle. But we've had a lot of success with popular movements in America, and if we've learned anything from them, and I hope that all of us never stop studying them, it's that a mobilized public is essential to winning the climate battle. Let's keep it simple, let's keep it honest, let's keep it real, and unite the environmental movement behind a carbon tax.